I have a lot to say today. I feel like the last few videos I have come with like this jaded, kind of sad, somber energy, and today I am super fired up. I even went and bought a new lipstick for this episode. Just kidding. I wanted to buy a dark brown lipstick and a pink lipstick, and I was able to find a pink lipstick that I like today. So I did buy it right before this, but yeah. So I have a lot to say. I always have a lot to say. I notice that when I'm fired up, a lot of the times what I need to do is just take a moment to get grounded in what I actually feel, because I think for someone like myself who was really raised and further into my adulthood conditioned to believe that negative emotions or difficult emotions are bad and should kind of be repressed, or you should be able to like verbalize your thinking instead of expressing your feeling. It's easy for me to make jokes or lean into this passion, like kind of passionate discourse about something that I am experiencing, instead of going like, I feel really heavy about it. And so, in a way, I think that this is authentic to me, as are the previous videos where I was a little bit more downtrodden. But I think a lot of the time that tends to be the bedrock of what I'm actually feeling when something difficult happens, is like that sort of disbelief and maybe discouragement and just kind of sad, just the somber. So I'm going to take a second to ground myself. And unfortunately, we might end back up at this kind of being a downtrodden video if that is indeed what's in the bedrock. But I think it will help me to express myself the most true to what I'm actually feeling. So I woke up this morning and I was very productive, didn't feel like I was in functional freeze at all. I started doing this thing where I have this whiteboard in my kitchen and it's massive. And I sectioned off different pieces of the whiteboard. And I have like an admin corner, a household corner, finance corner, just different things that I would have a to do list around. And I write the to do list in each of those separated categories so I can kind of clearly see like what has to financially impact me, or what is something that's like a cleaning task and that's in a different section than the finance tasks, and so on. And it's really helped me to break down and actually select what I want to do, because I think a to-do list could sort of be infinite, and mine usually are. I'm like, oh, there's all of these things I want to do. And so sectioning it off like that, I have a then separate empty box that I start, and then I pick things from each of the category that I feel like absolutely have to be done today. And then I write that list, and that's the only action items that I have for the day. If I get more done, that's fine, but those are the things I try to whittle it down as much as possible, and that's been really helpful. So when I woke up this morning and I was productive, that felt really good, but I noticed that there was this feeling in my body. And that's how a lot of the podcast episodes started, even back when they were not video yet. I would feel something that I couldn't describe. And I still have to do this, but I was so out of touch with myself, in touch enough to know that something was bothering me, but out of touch enough to not know how to get there. So what I would do is, if you could picture like a wheel with all of these possibilities on it, and I would sort of like spin the wheel, so to speak. And in other words, I would pick a thing that I thought it could be, And then I would try to see if the feeling that the thing that I picked matched the feeling that I had in my body. And if it didn't, then I would just move on to the next thing. And even now I'm feeling strange in my body and I'm not sure why. But I'll keep trying to get the message out and see if something comes up that feels related. So, let's get started. I'm feeling just my initial fired upness kind of coming down, and I'm really feeling my emotions start to change, and I'm feeling very emotional and I'm not sure why. I think it is because it is heavy to talk about the things that I want to say, and I feel like exhausted that I have to talk about them. And I'm considering right now just turning off the camera and going and doing something else that is less mentally and emotionally exhausting. But I feel like it needs to be said. So I'm trying to balance honoring the resistance in my body, but also, there are parts of me that do want the message to get out and do want people to know that these things are important and they need to be discussed. So I appreciate your patience with me as I slow down. So I was in a room just a few days ago, and I was with a woman and a man. And we were having a discussion about a person we had seen, the woman and I. We had seen this person, and we wanted to know if the person we were talking about was the same person. The man had not seen who we were talking about. So I described the attributes that I could remember about the woman that I had seen. And I said she was tall and blonde. And the woman in the room was trying to remember if the person she saw also matched those attributes. The man in the room, he was talking about how it might have been from the perspective of the people who hired the woman we were describing. And he said that they were probably like, oh, wow, a blonde woman, that's like exciting. And what I didn't know at the time was whether he was trying to make a commentary on that being the perspective of the people who hired the tall blonde woman. I didn't know if he was trying to express that that's what would be what he would think if he saw a blonde woman in that role. What I did know for sure was that it kind of was like this violin string popping moment, right? It kind of just like stopped me in my tracks a little bit. And what I didn't know also in that moment is whether what he said bothered me because I'm not blonde or because of something deeper. So I was trying to figure out what I felt about it. And I realized that all these days later, that happened, I think, on Monday. And so today is Sunday. So almost a week later, I realized that I was still kind of like, it wasn't that I had been thinking about this the whole time, but it was that it came back into my mind. And so it had left a residue, so to speak. And then interestingly enough, on Wednesday, I was at lunch with someone that is very near and dear to me, another man, and we have known each other for, I want to say, like 8 years now or something. And I think it will be 8 years this year. And he is a huge part of my life, someone who I would consider a mentor in the past. I mean, he's the kind of guy, he's a man in his mid 60s, and he's the kind of guy that I will text on Father's Day and say Happy Father's Day to. And since I've moved away from where he lives, I will text him on his birthday, Happy Birthday. And I've done this for the past few years. I'll say, Where do you want to eat dinner today or lunch? And I will put in an order for wherever he tells me he wants to eat, or I will send him a gift card to where he wants to go for his birthday, and he'll go. And he's been a big part of my life for a long time. And he showed up for me on Wednesday. I was going through something really hard. I was traveling. I was near the town that he was in. He drove an hour. I was about an hour away passing through from where he was. He drove that hour to come have lunch with me for just an hour and a half. And so he has definitely put in reciprocal effort into our relationship for sure. And we were sitting at lunch, and actually we were talking about the state of the men in our age group, in my age group. And he was actually agreeing with me about some of the insecurities that he's noticed and some of the flaw finding that he has seen men in my age group do to women who are interested in them. And he was describing the woman that had what seems to be a pretty obvious crush on his nephew. And he was talking to me about how his nephew was kind of saying these negative things about this woman, making assumptions about her, when it was obvious that she was really into him and she was beautiful. And so he couldn't understand why his nephew wasn't really kind of taking the bait here, or what the disconnect was between his nephew and this person. And the way he described her to me was she was beautiful. She was blonde. And I'll pause there for a second. What I have noticed over very many years of hearing this is that people use the word or the descriptor blonde as if to say, how can I convince you that this person is beautiful? I know, I'll say that they're blonde. And so when you hear that, it's like the person expects you to assume that you have all of the data, the definitive data, that what they're saying about this person is true. I've heard 2 people in 1 week say this now. I've had my ex-mother-in-law even say this to describe women that she'd seen that she thought was beautiful. And the irony is that she was not blonde. She had 3 sons at the time who were all in relationships with women, none of whom were blonde. And she had, more than one son, obviously, and half her sons weren't blonde. And so it's just this very interesting thing that American society has picked up for probably very many years now, that if you say that, the person that you are describing that to, now they know beyond a shadow of a doubt that the person you are describing is unarguably attractive in some way. It has been used as this shortcut to this assumption that the person is superior in some way. And we all know that there are Eurocentric standards of beauty in the United States. We all know that. That's not a mystery. But I think it's when you hear the individual saying it, particularly when that individual isn't blonde. And you know who's never said something like that? Is a person who is blonde. It's always someone who isn't blonde that has said that to me, that has said that in the situations that I'm referencing. So I find that very interesting too. And where it gets tricky is that I think if you say something about this, and that's why I hesitated in the moment where it first happened when I was in the room with the woman and the other man. And I think that's why I was also speechless when I heard my friend say it when we were at lunch. Because at the time, and I think probably for the average person who hears this, I'm sure I am not the only person that has heard other people say this to them and around them. You feel like if you were to say anything, it's going to sound like you're salty about it. It's going to sound like, oh, well, you're not blonde. So how embarrassing for you. You're kind of jealous. You're bitter and all of that. And I think that's what made me hesitate because I was really trying to figure out why this was bothering me. I don't have any issues with people being even only attracted to someone who is blonde, like that being a type. We all have preferences of things that we like, and I think that's okay. I think if you're the kind of person who sees blondness as attractive, that's okay. What I think, what I have the problem with is that we can use a trait, especially a trait that someone did not choose, but certainly any traits in general, to say definitively that this person is fill in the blank. Because what it does is it completely strips the individuality from each and every person, and it makes false assumptions. And what I realized is that sometimes the person, I don't even think they realize what they're doing in that situation. And I'll give a couple examples about what I mean. In the situation of my friend who I was at lunch with, I know for a fact that this man thinks I'm beautiful. He's, like I said, been sort of a father figure to me. So, in respectful ways, he's complimented me in different situations over the years. And so, you have situations where I know that this person views me in a certain way. So, there's this acknowledgement that someone can be beautiful and not blonde. But it's sort of this like, if someone is blonde, that they absolutely have to be the standard of beauty. And there's no question about it. And of course, all of these things are subjective, but that's exactly the point. That's exactly my point. And I'll give an example of where this actually, in theory, should work in my favor. And I feel exactly the same way about it. It is when you tell someone that you're an engineer. I would say close to 100% of the time, when someone asks me what my job is and I say that I'm an engineer, they go, wow. And they usually follow it up with something like, you must be really smart, or that sounds really hard. And like, you must have had to do XYZ to get there. And they make in their mind all of these assumptions about me from that one phrase alone. And that's just simply not true. It is simply not true that you have to be particularly intelligent in any way to be an engineer. And I say that with the utmost respect for my profession. And I say that grounded in reality because I work with engineers every single day. And just like when I worked as a server at a restaurant, there are standout people and people who you are like, how did you get here? And that's going to be true no matter what profession you're in. And when people say to me, when they make this assumption that I'm intelligent because I'm an engineer, it actually makes me feel like my intelligence is downplayed. Because what I believe about myself to be true is I do believe that I'm an intelligent person. And I believe that I was intelligent before I became an engineer. And I believe that I will still continue to be intelligent regardless of what profession I choose, especially since I know I probably won't end my life as an engineer. There's a good chance that my heart lies in a different direction. And it would be a tragedy if people assumed less of me, even if I was exactly the same, simply because I wasn't an engineer anymore. And I was actually talking to one of my friends about this the other day in terms of being an engineer. She was also an engineer, and she was also a PhD engineer as well. And what I realized that I was able to share with her, and she felt the same way as well, is that it's actually a disservice to people to do that. Like I mentioned before, it sort of strips the individuality from a person, and it actually gets people kind of stuck and trapped in shame. It has the potential to do that. And for a long time, I actually felt that resistance in my body that maybe being an engineer wasn't the path that I wanted to stay on for the rest of my life. And because I believed and was starting to believe what society was telling me about what it meant to be an engineer, I was afraid to think about leaving the path of being an engineer because I didn't want to seem like I couldn't hack it. I wasn't smart enough. I was a failure. And all of these things that were trapping me in this hamster wheel of my own dissatisfaction simply because I was like not able to see that my value, my intellectual abilities were completely outside of the profession that I was doing to earn a paycheck in the day to day. And moving further into the PhD situation, we actually talked about it, and these were some of the things that she struggled with too, is people making assumptions about what it was like not to just have a PhD, but to have a PhD in engineering. And what it causes people to do is to be afraid to ask for help. Because if you're a PhD, then you should know this. You should know that. You should fill in the blank. And she's experienced that in her life as well. And that's something that I think I experienced. I know that I experienced in my career, is feeling like I should XYZ because this is what an engineer should, you know? And so, as a non blonde woman, I think it is a tragedy to women who are not blonde and women who are blonde to have certain things be assumed of you simply because of the color of your hair. An attribute that you didn't even choose. There are many, and technically, most of the beautiful women in the world are not blonde, statistically, right? Because if we're taking the number of women in the world and statistically how many of them are blonde, and let's say every group had the same number of beautiful women, then you're going to have obviously way more women who are not blonde and beautiful than you are going to have women who are blonde and beautiful, because they're just one category. And so they're going to be the smallest category. And statistically, the number of women on the planet Earth with naturally blonde hair is extremely low. It's extremely low. And I think that has something to do with it too. In some ways, we love our novelty. You know, we love blue eyes in society because they are also a statistical minority. And in some ways, we are really hard on statistical minorities. So it's funny what we will pick and choose in American society to think is valuable because it's less common, or to think is dangerous because it's less common. And so I would challenge all of us to think about why we say certain things. And I would challenge us too to think about why things impact us. I think another tragedy, this is not about having salt for blonde women. I can think of many blonde women that I find extremely stunning. And actually, I will shout one of them out. I think Desi Lydic is one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen in my life. If I saw her on the street not knowing who she was, I think she would turn my head. She's so gorgeous. So I definitely have appreciation for beauty in women, regardless of what they look like, even if they look different than me. I just want to be one small step forward in us as individuals challenging why we say the things that we say, why we even see things the way that we see them. What shortcuts do we use? The irony is that in the original story, I think that the person that I was describing, if I had to guess, was not going to fit the description of what the man who made a comment about her being blonde, what he was picturing in his mind. I have a pretty strong feeling about that. And for anyone who is wondering why I chose the hair color that I've chosen, because I guess in some lights or some angles, or depending on what you think, you could maybe think that it was blonde. I have never wanted blonde hair, but I have for many years wanted white hair. It is one of my dreams. My mom, who is an Indian woman, has extremely white hair, which she dyes. So don't tell her that I told you that. And that is something that I have wanted for a long time. And the color that my hair ends up as, if I dye it, is when I buy a box of white or platinum hair dye, I start to feel after a certain number of dyes, like processes, I start to feel the moment where I'm like, if I dye my hair one more time, it's going to be damaged because it's so dark, it's so black. And so the hair color, if I'm dyeing my hair, that it usually ends up at is wherever I feel like that point is. I try not to go past it. So I've come to terms with the fact that unless I have the same genetics that make my mom's hair do what her hair started doing, which my guess is that I probably don't, because by the time my mom was my age, she was already starting to have a pretty good chunk of white hair, and I have almost none. I do have like 3 or 4 strands of white hair, but she was much more advanced by the time she was my age. So I've come to the terms with the fact that I might not be a white-haired woman for a very long time. So we're just going to have this yellow, orange, in between situation from the box if we are wanting to do something instead of having black hair for a little while. But yeah, I was going to go further on with my message today and talk about just social and cultural literacy and awareness, and how someone else I know made a comment casually about a neighborhood needing to be gentrified because it was dangerous. And how, when I think of all of these things, I think buckle down and get used to and get comfortable with singleness for the very, very long haul, because I don't think that many people are thinking this way and seeing what the impact of just an innocent statement could be. Because it's not a statement of preference. I want to go back to that. Preference is okay. Most of the time, preference cannot be controlled. I find certain things beautiful that someone else isn't going to find beautiful. There are people who are going to look at me and maybe they won't think I'm ugly, but I'm just not going to be their cup of tea. And that's okay. All of that's okay. I think it's when we take our preference and we blanket statement that this is superior or this is the standard, that's when I think we run into trouble. And so if you are a blonde woman, I want you to know that your beauty is holistic. It comes from who you are as a person, and it comes from just the way our brains mathematically see symmetry and asymmetry and how those things work together and are cohesive on your face. And it comes from what the person viewing you, what their conditioning is, and how that plays into everything. And if you are a woman who is not blonde, you have exactly the same rules that are going to fall onto you as well. And I lift you up. And I hope that we, as all women, can know that our value and our worth is more than just our physical attributes, especially the ones that we didn't choose. And of course, you can control and dye your hair, but it's very hard to look like a natural hair anything if you're not a natural hair that. Dye doesn't really fool most people. And hair is one of those cool features that I do think is kind of an accessory. You know, you can make it blue, you can make it pink, and that may hurt or help how the world views you as attractive. But it's about your expression and it's about what feels good for you. And I just encourage all of us that we would challenge the things that people say and have healthy discourse and not villainize people who say things that make us cringe. And I also want to say that to reiterate my point earlier about not being able to feel like you can say anything, otherwise you're salty, there is this weird combination right now that everything and everyone is getting offended. But at the same time, if you get offended, your opinion is automatically sort of like dismissed. But let me be here to say that people are going to be offended by things that are offensive. It's offensive to say that only women with a certain color of hair are beautiful, or that this color of hair automatically makes one woman beautiful, and if another woman doesn't have it, she has to prove or have extra beauty in some way to make sure that people understand that she can be beautiful too. That's offensive. And I think it's okay for me to be feeling devalued and degraded and offended by something that is devaluing, is degrading, and is offensive. And I'm here to talk about it. And it's not because I'm salty. It's not because I want blonde hair or I'm jealous of blonde women. It's because I want to live in reality. And I want to dare to believe that we could live in a world where we challenge what the status quo says and we don't make someone superior for something that doesn't actually hold any intrinsic superiority. One of the ones that I dealt with myself coming from the inside of a status quo or something that society told me maybe I shouldn't like as much. This is still relatively new, but I realized that I like bald men. And it's not that that's necessarily my preference. And it's not that if there were twin men and one of them had hair and one of them didn't have hair, I would necessarily prefer the one who didn't have hair. But it was more me realizing that when a man has lost his hair, it doesn't necessarily make me think he's less handsome. And I actually kind of like the look. I like a really shaved head sometimes, or I like a bald head sometimes. And there are so many things that just like in life come with having had a man who's lost his hair, and it's you don't pay for haircuts, and it's kind of nice to feel, and you can tell what the man's gonna look like when he's lost his hair if he's already lost his hair. And so you know if your man is gonna be handsome with no hair. And I think there was a long time where I was kind of like I didn't want to admit that to myself, because society, that's something that we shame men for and we treat them as less than for. And what I realized is that if I let society force me to filter out people that I actually find very attractive with those traits, then I'm doing a disservice to myself. So, like what you like who you are, love what you love, and love who you are. Challenge your preferences if they are ones that you think society thinks that you should have. It sounds so silly, but it was so freeing to me to admit to myself, like, I think a bald head is kind of hot. So live in that freedom with me. Live in whatever your hair color is, or whatever your hair color isn't, because you maybe don't have hair. And let us remember that our perceptions, our preferences, our conditioning is not the law. It's okay that it's ours, but we don't have to project it onto other people, and we don't have to project society's standards onto ourselves. And we can be part of making it so that as a society, we can have a hugely diverse perception of what can be beautiful, what can be intelligent, what can be successful, what can be wonderful. Thanks for listening.